Okay, in this first lesson, we're going to ultimately be looking at what's called the unit circle. And unit circle is what allows us to actually graph the sine and the cosine functions along with the tangent. It's where all your trig graphs come from. But in order to get to the unit circle, first we need to learn a couple things. First of all, we'll be learning how to graph an angle in standard position. So we're going to be using just a normal XY axis here. And a couple things that we need to know, that the vertex of our angle will be the origin. Okay? So origin here will always represent the vertex of our angle. And then the initial side of our angle is going to be represented by the positive x-axis. So this is the initial side of our angle. Okay? Then the terminal side of our angle will be wherever the angle happens to stop. So maybe our angle comes around and it stops right here. Okay? This is called the terminal side of the angle. So the initial side is where it starts, and it's always the positive x-axis. And the terminal side is where it stops. And that depends on how many degrees your angle happens to be. Okay? So that's your initial side and your terminal side. We're going to look at graphing two types of angles, positive angles and negative angles. The difference between positive and negative angles is basically the direction in which they head. So in order to graph positive angles, you're going to need to know where 0 degrees starts, and that's where your initial side is. Again, our vertex will be at the origin. Our initial side will be the positive x-axis, and this is going to represent 0 degrees. And positive angles go counterclockwise. Okay? So they head this way, so this would be 90 degrees. Coming around, this would be 180 degrees. Coming around down here, add another 90 to that, that'd be 270 degrees. And come all the way around, this would represent 360 degrees. Okay? Now, on here, if we wanted to go 225 degrees, obviously, you would head towards 90. That would be 90 degrees. Come around here, this would be 180 degrees. And we're going to need to go past 180, somewhere between 180 and 270 degrees. So let's see how much further than 180 we are. So if we take the 225 and we subtract off the 180, we find out that that is 45 degrees. Well, we need to go 45 more degrees. Well, this is a full 90, so 45's got to be in the middle of that. So our terminal side is exactly in the middle of 180 and 270. So here is our terminal side of 225 degrees. Now when you're sketching these angles, make sure you draw an arrow that represents the direction in which you're headed, because this angle here will be different than this angle coming the other direction. So we're going to need to know which direction we're headed. Okay? So we'll talk about this one a little bit more here in a second. Let's go to the negative angle, negative 135 degrees. Negative angles are sketched slightly different. You still have the vertex at the origin, and the initial side is still your positive x-axis, and that represents 0 degrees on our graph. But on the negative angles, we actually graph those clockwise. So this would down here would represent negative 90 degrees. Over here, this would represent negative 180 degrees. Coming around, this would be negative 270 degrees. And then once you make it all the way around, this would be negative 360 degrees. Okay? So on this particular graph, we're trying to graph negative 135 degrees. So we're going to start off, we're going to head towards 90, negative 90, so we're at negative 90. And then we know we're somewhere between 180 and 90. So in this case, let's find out how much further past 90 we are. And I'm just going to use positive measurements here. So if we take 135 and subtract off 90, we find out that that is 45 more degrees away from the 90. So negative 135 is 45 more degrees, which coincidentally gets you right in the middle again. Okay? So this is your negative 135 degrees. So this terminal side and this terminal side here are identical. They end up in the exact same spot. Now, when that occurs, that's a special type of angle. Those are what are called coterminal angles. Coterminal angles are angles that have the same terminal side, and they can be found by adding or subtracting one full rotation. Because when you go around a circle, you get to the same spot again and again and again and again by just keeping adding 360. Okay? So let's look at an example of that. Let's try to keep this as easy as possible. Let's use a 90-degree angle. So if we had a 90-degree angle, okay, obviously you would get to the spot here. Let me just sketch it right here. We were doing 90 degrees. That would end up right here. That would be a 90-degree angle. Okay? But that's not the only angle that ends up in that same spot. What we could do is we could go and keep going around the circle another whole time. Well, how many degrees would that be? Well, it would be the 90 plus 360 degrees. If you add these together, you get 450 degrees. So 90 degrees here, and 450 degrees are coterminal. They're coterminal angles. And you probably can't see that real well. Let me write that here a little bit clearer. These are coterminal angles. Okay? But we could get another angle by just adding another 360 degrees onto that. So if we added another 360 degrees here, you would get 0, 1, 810 degrees. Okay? So 810 degrees is also a coterminal angle. Basically, you would get that by just going around the circle one additional time. And all of those angles are stopped at the exact same point every single time. Okay. And we will do some examples of coterminal angles more here in a minute.